Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Tomasz Koper, sitting in for Divya Gopalan. How do you feel about manga? How about manhwa? And comics, bande dessinées, or graphic novels? And how well can you tell the difference between them? In today's episode of Connected, we'll be talking about all of the above and taking a look at Taiwan's place and potential in the world of visual storytelling. And filling in the speech bubbles with their knowledge and expertise, we welcome Adina Zemanek, who's a lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire, and Stevie Suan, who's an associate professor at Hosei University in Japan. Stevie, since you research manga and anime, so I'm going to start with a general question. What is manga and what sets it apart from comics that our Western viewers might be more familiar with?
That's a really good question, and also a very difficult one. It's a heated debate, I think, even within the broader field. But my personal view is to look at manga more as a particular type of style or a series of conventions and patterns that get regularly repeated. So I think that type of patterned expression would be distinct from what you would see in bande dessinée or in things like American comics or broader graphic novels. And this includes a type of, or types of repeated character designs, often things that are kind of stereotyped with like big eyes and certain types of pointy or wilder hair, certain types of manga-esque facial expressions, so something like arched eyes for smiling or round eyes for shock, increase in particular panel types or paneling types. So there's a lot of panels in a lot of things that we would stereotypically see as manga, as well as things like what's called impact lines or speed lines, and really a prevalence for black and white. So this is just a kind of small grouping of these types of conventions, I think, but those are things that really would distinguish, even just at first glance, something that we would associate with manga versus comics that are popular in, say, the US or Europe.
Adina, you focus more specifically on Taiwanese comics, sometimes called manhwa, although also there's a debate whether it's part of the same thing. So, well, let me ask you this. What made you first take note of Taiwanese comics?
Oh, that's a good question as well. So I was in 2014 in Taiwan, and I happened to have bought a book at the Eslit bookstore. And although the book was very interesting to me, and I treat it as an introduction to Taiwan itself, I was intrigued by the fact that at that time in 2014, many people in Taiwan I spoke to did not seem to be aware of the fact that there are local comics. So that's how I first paid attention to Taiwanese comics, by buying a comic book and by the fact that local comics did not seem to be known at that time.
Well, so I know that this particular comic that you bought the first time was by a Taiwanese author called Xiao Zhuang. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And the book is called The Diary of the 80s in Taiwan.
Well, we recently had the pleasure of talking to Zhuang Yongxin, a Taiwanese manga artist also known as Xiao Zhuang. He told us a bit about the characteristics and the development of comics in Taiwan. Take a look.
台湾的漫画特色就是都是一个人作业，我觉得最大的特色就是大部分都是一个人工作，完成所有的事情。韩国其实整个娱乐产业他们是一起做的，就是他从音乐、影像、剧本，然后漫画，他们整体是一起做的，从90年代以前就开始。那目标都是面向国际。那当然他们条漫的成立是有一个过程，就是大概在90年代初，韩国的这些民众他们自己去倡议说我们要看我们自己的漫画，我们不要看日本漫画，然后他们自己从民众开始发声。那这个情形跟台湾有一点点不同，因为台湾就是从80年代这个看日漫开始 我们有很年轻人有很大的偏食的状态，就是因为习惯那样子的节奏跟表现方式，所以大部分就会以日漫为标准。那回过头来检查台湾的漫画，那所以以日漫为标准的话，你总是会觉得说啊，日本画的比较好，就常常有这样子的心态。那近年来，尤其是2000年以后，那个网络发达之后，那我们接触就是开放整个解严之后，台湾整个开放之后，我觉得台湾创作者能够接触到的漫画越来越多，那各式各样的表现形式就进来了。那台湾也开始有各式各样不同形式的漫画创作，就是比较不会集中在好像只有日式的这种表现方式。那我想台湾会有这么多的关于历史啊这些东西的表现，可能跟这一阵子政府在鼓励台湾漫画要做自己的内容有关。那跟我们所谓做在地的内容，常常年轻的作者就会联想到关于我们的历史，我们的或者是其实也很大部分在讲台湾的鬼啊、神啊这些宗教啊，然后还有我们曾经这个台湾生活的面貌，这个我们感觉很直接的就是我们的属于台湾的漫画。
So, Adina, do you agree with this assessment by Xiao Zhuang that Taiwanese comics are way more individualized or produced by one person as opposed to a group of people where the lead artist is more like a brand?
Yes, definitely. That is the way, that has to do with the way Taiwanese comic artists are trained. And with how they work and how they publish. There isn't any system of apprenticeship in Taiwan. Comics artists are beginning their training and by themselves. There aren't, or there weren't until recently, I'm not very familiar with how it is right now because things are changing very fast and very intensively in Taiwan. So there aren't university-specified university trainings in comics. So comic artists usually begin their journey in comics, begin trainings by themselves. And indeed, they also forge a path in publishing by themselves as well.
And Stevie, if it is really true that in Japan this is more of a collective process, what is the relationship between that and individual creativity? Because those are usually the names that we all know. We all know Miyazaki, right? We don't really, most people are not familiar with the team behind it. So what is that relationship between this lead individual creativity and the group that supports that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So manga production in Japan is pretty complicated, and it often involves the publishers very heavily. So there's editors, for instance, that work really intensely with the manga artists who occasionally they team up with a writer, but often they are doing it or they're promoted as the single author. But they do have a small team of assistants, and that can range in number, but assistants are relatively common in the, I guess you would call it like mainstream manga publishing within Japan. On the other hand, though, there is a very vibrant and large scene of fan productions. These are called doujinshi, and these are individual creators. Sometimes they're professionals, sometimes they're amateurs or people who have just kind of liked and made manga on their own, and they sell them at specific they call them comic markets and other types of events where they publish their own works. And in fact, sometimes people from the industry will go there to kind of recruit people for the comics in the actual mainstream publishing industry. And now with the internet, there's also some people who are on their own who are also creating comics and distributing them online.
And Adina, is there anything similar happening in Taiwan, especially when it comes to this individual creativity from fans? Is there a lot of fan-created content?
Yes, I was just going to add that in Taiwan, this doujinshi environment exists as well. It's called 同人志 by the Chinese Mandarin readings of this word. So yes, so if we can talk about the collective aspect of comics in Taiwan, about the collective aspect of training, of exhibiting comics, that is the markets, the fairs that take place in Taiwan that Stevie mentioned and which take place in Taiwan as well. So there is this network of acquainted artists who ask for each other's opinions when learning to draw. So yes, there is very much this environment in Taiwan as well. So fan comics, these artists draw either fan works, so beginning from the spin-offs from well-known Japanese authors or works, or they draw their own works very often in Japanese style as well, according to these manga-esque conventions that Stevie mentioned a moment ago as well. And many artists also have a fan base, an internet fan base. Many artists from this environment create a fan base. And they do find publishers either at this fair or through accumulating a significant number of fans online.
Well, yes, Stevie, yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's very interesting, and I just want to comment, I think, because it's very similar, I think, with what's going on in Japan as well. And there's a lot of people who, they make their own fan works based off of already popular published works as well. And as Adina was pointing out, these manga-esque conventions, they kind of operate as like a common language, I suppose, against amongst people and fans who produce this. So it brings into another dimension to this idea of a kind of collective or collaborative creativity.
Well, the similarities between Taiwan and Japan when it comes to fandom and the actual works don't end there, as we'll find out later. But I would like to take a step outside of Asia for a second, because these days manga and anime are international phenomena, finding more and more fans abroad. Connected recently spoke to Svitlana Pryzinchuk, the CEO of the Ukrainian publisher Safran, about efforts to bring Asian comics to Europe. And this is what she said.
Actually, we bought this first title, and then we made like official post that okay, we bought our first Taiwanese title, manhua title, and people were like, "Oh my God, that's so great!" It was like super, like a lot of people subscribed to our pages in all social media. They were like, and it was like really very young audience. I would say the core is between 15-30, between 15-30. These are actually almost the same people who like manga, who like reading Japanese manga, who like watching anime. It's basically the same audience, but Taiwanese manhwa is absolutely new world with them. They never knew anything about Taiwanese manhwa, nothing. But already our Ukrainian readers understood the difference that Taiwanese manhwa is very different in terms of topics, in terms of drawing. And I see how Taiwanese artists really use this huge art background of the previous generations in terms of work with ink, for example, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing drawing.
Adina, how come people from countries that are so culturally distant from Taiwan resonate so much with Taiwanese manhwa?
I think that this is due to the fact that Taiwanese comics are very diverse. There's something for anyone in them. So apart from these manga-esque type conventions that we mentioned, apart from this group, this category of comics, there are also other kinds of comics inspired by, just as Svetlana brought it up, comics inspired by the conventions of Chinese ink art. there is a very famous Taiwanese author, Zhang Wen, who creates according to these aesthetic conventions. There are also comics that are more that overlap in style more with European ones as well. So there is something for everyone, in fact, in Taiwanese comics, and that's one of the branding elements of Taiwanese comics, the fact that they are so diverse.
Well, speaking of branding, Japan, especially when it comes to manga and anime, is an absolute powerhouse in soft power, in attracting attention from fans all over the world. So Stevie, what do you think Taiwan could learn from Japan if it wants to kind of reach more fans abroad?
Well, that's a complicated question because there's actually quite a lot of criticism raised against the kind of cool Japan initiatives within Japan, and many people have actually stated that it's actually in spite of these nation branding initiatives that anime, manga, and games, as well as fashion, have become so popular outside of Japan. So in some ways, it might be looked at as a model to avoid, perhaps, rather than to emulate. But I do think that there has been a certain degree of success in the sense of internally within Japan, seeing anime and manga as a type of national cultural products, when just about 25, 30 years ago, it wasn't. It didn't quite have the same status within Japan. So it's a bit of a contentious view, I think, on my part. But I think that there might be other pathways to thinking about how to promote different cultural products.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned manga, anime, and games as one package because, at least in my opinion, there is a certain degree of overlap in fandoms and in the kind of people who are attracted to this kind of content. And manga, anime, just like comics, movies, and gaming, tend to attract very dedicated fandoms. And one way in which those groups express themselves is cosplay. We asked filmmaker Jay Chern to give us a glimpse into the fascinating world of cosplayers.
In May of 2023, Comic World Taiwan collaborated with Nijisanji N, hosting their first ever fan convention at Taipei Expo, allowing fans to interact with their favorite cosplayers or virtual YouTubers. This is Alma and Yao, Taiwanese cosplayers. With over 200,000 followers on Instagram and cosplay becoming a global phenomenon with millions of enthusiasts, they decided to quit their day jobs and try turning their passion into a professional career.
通常会玩 cosplay， 他就是因为喜欢动漫，然后呢，就可能很喜欢这个角色，
就想要成为那个角色。对那个角色有憧憬，对，就想扮演成。
严格说起来是去年开始做 YouTube 嘛，所以呢也算是现在都 AKA 啊，所以就是 coser AKA YouTuber 这样子。cosplay 这个字呢，其实它最早是从日本来的，然后。也就是说，大家其实想到这种动漫 cosplay 文化，为什么会先联想到日本？是因为它真的就是从那边过来的。而且其实 cosplay 也不是只有仅限于就是动画、漫画，其实现在很多也是有出游戏。我的话，我自己是因为我喜欢演戏，然后我最一开始玩 cosplay 是因为这个是并存的。我本来就喜欢动漫，但是呢，因为我也很喜欢演戏，可是因为我没有管道，我觉得在台湾。你去当一个演员，跟你去成为一个 coser， 可能当一个 coser 比较简单。
我自己是先看漫画，然后喜欢里面的角色，然后才想要 cosplay 的。一开始也不太敢一个人就是跑过去，也是因为我们班上有人就是说，要不要一起啊？这样子才有那个冲动。
Visit our website or YouTube channel for a full version of this video. So I want to ask you both. Maybe let's start with Adina. Have you ever tried cosplay? Has this aspect of fandom ever attracted you beyond your academic interest?
I'm afraid that it hasn't. No, I haven't tried cosplay.
Stevie, what about you?
No, I haven't, but I just don't know a character that I think I could emulate well, so it's held me back.
And are there any downsides to having a fan base that is this dedicated? Because people really line up for hours for these conventions. They really care about the source material and what happens to it. And I can imagine there could potentially be some negative aspects of this much interest. What do you think, Stevie?
Well, I mean, I think that it's it's a hobby to I think to put it in a kind of generalized terms, and people really enjoy their hobbies and they get into it a lot. And as I think the video pointed, that some people who are exceptional at their hobbies may also be able to turn that into a type of business or a full-time venture that they do. So I think that it's really, of course, depends on each individual case that we're looking at in terms of how intense fandom can be. But I think there is a kind of really positive element to being able to be, invigorated by this type of material.
Well, there is very little surprise when people see cosplayers out on the street in Taiwan, as I assume is the case in Japan as well. Adina, do you think that this level of involvement could find a place in European fandoms, in American fandoms, maybe outside of big Comic Cons and stuff like that?
Yes, definitely. From what I know, I taught at the university in Poland, first at the Japanese philology department, and then at a department specializing in cultural studies. And many students, many young people who chose to study Japanese language, literature, culture, were drawn into this by their being fans of manga, anime, and also by practicing cosplay. So students at both departments, Japanese language, literature, culture, and area studies, cultural studies, were fans of Korean or Japanese culture. So they were practicing cosplay as well. And I know that they were even making videos at the university while cosplay, or use this to promote their studies to a general audience.
Now, so I would like to maybe dispel a few myths about fandom that can be this dedicated that I have seen floating around the internet, let's just say. What is the perception of cosplayers and people who are this involved in the hobby in Japan? You said that it was a passion, but do people universally see it as such, or do they also echo these sentiments that oh, those kids are going way too far?
I think it depends. Part of it is I think generational, but I think in recent years there's been a subtle but steady decrease in a kind of stigmatization of these types of fan activities. And then in the specifically the late 80s and the early 90s, it was quite stigmatized. This broader anime, manga, fandom, otaku or fujoshi fandoms, which are different gendered versions of it. So the otaku are typically seen as the male fans, and fujoshi seen as female fans of a specific genre of manga. And over the years, it's that stigma has decreased. So I think there's potential for it to continue to grow and continue to be positively received, but it does have a storied history.
Well, we're almost out of time in the show, but before we go, I would like to ask each one of you to give our viewers one recommendation of a work, it could be manga or anime, that would be a good entry into the genre. Adina, let's start with you.
Well, my recommendation is always the Diary of the 80s in Taiwan. But I could also recommend The Son of Formosa, a more recent book published, I think it was in 2022. That is a very beautiful book and that also that links the history of Taiwan with also with the history of comics to some extent.
And Stevie, what would you recommend? I'm sure people come to you all the time, you know, since this is your area of research. What do you usually tell them?
Well, I think it really depends because there's so much content that it really depends on the types of genres that you really like. So I think that if you're interested in seeing a kind of very skillfully crafted but intense action story, I would recommend a relatively obscure but still I think accessible work called Rurouni Kenshin, and it's the prequel called Trust and Betrayal, and it's from the late 90s, and it's about four episodes, and they're very short, but the animation is quite good while still connecting to, I think, major franchises.
Well, thank you for the recommendations, and thank you both for the conversation today. Huge thanks for your knowledge, your expertise that you decided to share with us today. And with that, we've sadly come to the end of this episode. Once again, thank you to both my guests, and to our audience at home. Join us in the next episode when we'll be discussing all the business and the networks behind your favorite comic artists. Until then, it's been great to have your company. Thank you, and stay connected.